Hi friends. Please subscribe and help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's go. The evening started like any other, but the second I pushed open the heavy oak door of the bar, the very air seemed to shift. Dim amber light spilled over scuffed leather booths, and the air was thick with the low hum of chatter and the rhythmic clink of glassware. A wall of white noise filled the room, punctuated by bursts of muffled laughter. I took a few steps inside, a sudden, inexplicable knot tightening in my gut. Something was off. I scanned the room as I made my way toward the mahogany bar top. The bartender didn't even wait for me to speak. He just slid a glass of neat bourbon toward me, my usual. I slid onto the stool, my hand moving mechanically to grip the glass. I pulled out my iPhone and stared at the screen, but I wasn't actually seeing anything. The texts, the emails, the endless stream of notifications, it all blurred into one big, digital nothing. And then I heard it. Her laugh. That sound sent a chill down my spine like a cold Atlantic wind off the harbor. I knew that laugh down to the very last vibration. I knew how it rang out when we were joking around in the kitchen, how it used to fill our home with a warmth I hadn't felt in months. But tonight, it sounded different. I slowly lifted my head, my body freezing as if someone had hit the mute button on the entire world. Tucked away in a far corner of the bar, bathed in the soft glow of a vintage table lamp, sat Grace. She was leaning forward, her smile radiant, her eyes sparkling with a light I hadn't seen in a long time. But she wasn't looking at me. Across from her sat a man, tall, radiating a quiet confidence. His hand was resting lightly on her forearm, a gesture so casual and familiar it felt almost rehearsed. The rest of the bar simply ceased to exist. The music, the laughter, the clinking of ice, it all faded into the background. It was just the two of them. I watched as her fingers toyed with the rim of her wine glass, her gaze softening as she looked at him. It was so intimate it felt like I was trespassing on someone else's life. I gripped my glass harder, feeling the sharp rim bite into my palm. My heart was thundering against my ribs, but my limbs felt heavy, like they were cast in lead. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and walk out, to keep pretending the truth didn't exist. But my feet started moving forward anyway. One step. Then another. I walked toward them, my eyes locked on her face. She suddenly noticed a shadow falling across the table and looked up. That radiant smile vanished instantly, as if a mask had been ripped away. Her eyes went wide, a chaotic mix of shock, terror, and something else I couldn't quite name. Sam? Her voice trembled, sounding exactly like someone who had just been caught red-handed. The man shot a quick, measuring look at me, but he stayed remarkably calm, as if he didn't view me as a threat. Grace recoiled slightly, almost as if she were trying to put him between us, her eyes darting around the room looking for an exit that wasn't there. I didn't say a word. I slowly twisted the gold wedding band off my finger, feeling the cold metal drag against my skin. It felt heavier than it ever had before. I squeezed it in my palm one last time before dropping it onto the table, right in front of her. "I think this belongs to you now," I said. My voice was as cold and flat as the ice cubes melting in the bottom of my glass. She opened her mouth, struggling to find words, but nothing came out. The man remained silent, though his composure was starting to look forced, like he finally realized he'd stumbled into the middle of something much darker than a casual drink. I turned and walked away without looking back, ignoring the way her voice cracked as she cried out my name. Sam. The night air outside was sharp and biting, hitting me like a physical blow to the face. I stepped into the shadows of the Boston street, my thoughts a frantic mess, spinning like leaves in a gale. I made it to my Ford, climbed into the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My eyes dropped to my bare finger. The missing ring felt like a gaping hollow void that was rapidly consuming everything inside me. I sat there staring into the darkness, my mind racing. How many times had this happened? How many nights, while I was giving her my total trust, had she been out finding comfort with someone else? How many nights had I stayed late at the office, grinding away to build a future for us, thinking she was doing the same, only for her to be with him? The thought made me feel physically ill. I needed answers, but I wasn't ready to look at her again, not yet. Instead, I just drove. I drifted through the city streets, the neon lights of downtown blurring into long streaks of color, trying to quiet the storm raging in my chest. Every memory of our life together played back like a cruel highlight reel. Our wedding day, the trips to the Cape, the late-night talks when we promised each other forever. How much of it had been a lie? After what felt like hours, I pulled into our driveway. The house was dark, and her car was missing. She hadn't come home. I didn't know if I felt relieved or if it was just another knife to the heart. I sat there, paralyzed between the urge to go inside and the urge to disappear, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Grace. "Sam, please come home. We need to talk." Talk? What was left to discuss after what I'd just seen with my own two eyes? But despite the white-hot anger and the bitterness, a part of me, the part that hadn't fully processed the betrayal yet, wanted to hear what she had to say. I don't know if I was looking for an explanation, an apology, or some kind of miracle. When I finally walked through the front door, the silence in the house was so heavy it felt like the air had turned to stone. Grace was sitting on the sofa, her face pale, mascara-streaked tears running down her cheeks. She looked at me as if she were searching for something in my eyes, maybe a hint of forgiveness, maybe a way out. She wasn't going to find either. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor. Those words hit me like a sledgehammer. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh and shook my head. "Oh really? How exactly were you planning on me finding out, Grace? Were you ever going to tell me, or were you just going to keep playing house while you snuck around behind my back?" She flinched at my tone, but she didn't look away. "It's not what you think," she started, her voice breaking. "Not what I think." I raised my voice, the anger finally boiling over. "I saw you, Grace. I saw the way you were sitting with him, the way you laughed, the way you touched him. I saw the look in your eyes, the look you haven't given me in years. Don't play me for a fool. Don't sit there and tell me that was innocent." She went quiet, appearing to search for the right words. Finally, she managed to choke out, "It's complicated." That word, complicated, sent me over the edge. I took a step toward her. Complicated. I was shouting now. "Yeah, you're right, it's real complicated. You're my wife. You're supposed to be on my team. Instead, you're spending your nights with some guy while I am out there working my tail off to give us a good life. So go ahead, Grace, tell me, where's the complication in that?" The tears started flowing again, but I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no regret. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the fallout. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. It just happened. I was feeling so lonely, and he was just there." "Enough." I cut her off, throwing my hand up. "I don't want your excuses. Loneliness? That's your play? You have no idea how many nights I've felt lonely because you turned into a ghost in this house, cold, distant, and full of secrets. But you didn't see me running to some bar to find another woman to hold me." She didn't answer. She just buried her face in her hands and wailed. A small fading part of me wanted to go to her, to hold her, to say we'd figure it out. But I couldn't. Not this time. "I need space," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm, even though the storm was still screaming inside me. "I can't deal with this right now." I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned around and walked out of the house without looking back. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain: my life was never going to be the same again. I got back in the car and started driving aimlessly through the streets. The city lights smeared into long ribbons of white and red as I tried to wrap my head around it all. It just happened. What a pathetic excuse. Betrayal doesn't just happen. It isn't an accident. It's the end result of 1,000 little choices she made. Choices she made without a single thought for me, without a hint of remorse. I eventually pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. It was one of those greasy spoons where we used to end up at 3 in the morning when we first started dating. Back when forever actually meant something and didn't feel like a punchline. The irony wasn't lost on me as I ordered a black coffee I didn't even want, just to have something to do with my hands. The cheap ceramic mug felt like it was burning right through my skin. I needed the truth, the real unvarnished truth, not the half-baked excuses Shed served up back at the house. And deep down, I knew she wasn't going to hand it to me. If I wanted the real story, I'd have to dig it up myself. I pulled out my phone and did the one thing I promised myself I'd never do. I went down the rabbit hole of Grace's socials. Instagram, Facebook, anything I could find. At first, it was just the usual, shots from the office, brunch with friends, old vacation pics. But then I hit something that made my stomach drop. A photo from a corporate mixer 2 weeks ago. Everyone was smiling, holding up glasses of wine, and there he was, the guy from the bar, standing right next to her. His hand was draped over her shoulder with a casual intimacy that made my skin crawl. The caption read, "Such a great time with my incredible team, couldn't have done it without these guys." The pieces finally started clicking into place. He wasn't some random guy from a bar. He was a colleague Shed probably been spending 40 hours a week with for months. I kept scrolling, digging deeper. I found the comments first, little inside jokes and heart emojis that seemed innocent enough until you knew what I knew. Then, I hit the jackpot, a direct message thread. His message was simple, "Last night was incredible, can't stop thinking about you." Grace's reply, "Me too. I don't know how much longer I can keep this a secret. I hate lying to him." He shot back, "Just a little longer, it'll make it worth it. You know you're the only one I want." It felt like a physical blow to the gut. My suspicions hadn't been paranoia, they were facts. She'd been lying to me for months, maybe longer. She wasn't just having a moment of weakness, she was building an entire life behind my back. Now I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that she didn't even care enough to cover her tracks. By the time I left the diner, the sun was starting to peek over the Boston skyline. I drove home, knowing there was no going back. The life I thought I had was in a million pieces, and the woman I shared a bed with was a complete stranger. When I walked through the door, Grace was still out cold on the sofa, still wearing her clothes from the bar. She looked so peaceful, almost like an angel, as if she hadn't just destroyed everything we'd built. I stood in the doorway watching her, wondering how someone who was once my everything could become the source of so much pain. I turned around and went upstairs, letting her sleep. It didn't matter if she felt guilty or not. That morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. If she wanted to play games, I'd show her how it's done. I wasn't going to be the clueless husband anymore. I was going to document every single detail of her betrayal, because if this marriage was ending, I was leaving on my own terms. The morning was eerily quiet. When I went downstairs, Grace was still on the couch, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Seeing her lying there, so oblivious, made my blood boil. I've been up all night replaying her betrayal while she slept like a baby. I brewed a pot of coffee, and just the ritual of it helped steady my hands. It reminded me that from here on out, nothing would ever be the same. Confronting her right then would have been a mistake. She'd just use my emotions to manipulate me again. No, I had to be smarter. I had to see how deep the rabbit hole went. If I wanted to find out how far this had gone, I had to be methodical. My first move was her phone. I'd never been the type to snoop. I used to believe in trust. Or at least, I did before last night. I waited until she headed to the bathroom to hop in the shower, then I grabbed her phone and punched in the passcode. The messages I found confirmed everything. But there was something even worse. He wrote, "Can't wait for our weekend getaway, everything is booked, I need you all to myself." Grace's response, "Me too. Sam's been so distant lately, he won't even notice I'm gone." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. A weekend getaway? She was planning to run off with this guy while I stayed at home like a fool. A dozen questions flooded my brain. Where were they going? When was this happening? How did I miss all the signs? I checked her calendar and found an entry for the upcoming weekend marked corporate retreat. A lie, obviously, but a lie I never would have questioned. She'd even booked a room at a boutique hotel under her own name. It wasn't just carelessness, it was total disrespect. But now, I had what I needed. I spent the next few hours working like a man possessed, gathering every shred of evidence. I screenshotted the messages, the calendar invites, the hotel confirmation. By the time Grace finally came downstairs, I had a digital folder full of proof of her betrayal, her lies, and her complete indifference to me. "Good morning," she said, her voice light and almost cheerful, as if nothing had happened. It made my skin crawl. "Good morning," I forced myself to say. I had to keep my voice steady. It wasn't time to show my hand yet. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. I wondered if she was texting him right then, planning her little escape. The thought felt like a vice tightening around my heart, but I pushed it down. I decided to test her. Hey, what if we spend this weekend just the two of us? Maybe drive up to the cabin in New Hampshire, get away from everything? She froze for a split second, and I saw it, that momentary flicker of panic before the lie took over. This weekend? Her voice was cautious. Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual. Just a few days away from the city. I watched her mind racing, searching for an excuse. I don't know, Sam. IV got that corporate retreat, remember? It's a big deal for the new project. I really can't miss it. I just nodded, as if I believed her. Right. Of course. I saw the wave of relief wash over her, and it took everything I had not to snap. But I held it together. This wasn't the time for a fight. I had a plan, and I was going to follow it to the end. The rest of the day was a blur. Grace went about her business, but I was in my own head, assembling the pieces of the puzzle. She had no idea I was watching her every move, her every smile, her every effortless lie. It felt like a knife being twisted in my chest. That evening, she went to bed early, claiming she was exhausted. I knew better. She just wanted to be on her phone, texting him while I wasn't around. I waited until her breathing evened out, until I was sure she was asleep. Then I went downstairs and pulled up the file of evidence I'd gathered. Tomorrow, I was taking the next step. I wasn't just going to talk to her, I was going to expose her. I had to do it in a way that left her no room to wiggle, no room for more lies. She thought she was smarter than me, but she didn't realize I wasn't that naive husband anymore. Grace was in the kitchen when I got down. She was humming to herself, making coffee. Her carefree attitude was infuriating. She turned around and smiled at me, and for a second, I wondered how she could even look me in the eye. "Good morning," she said, handing me a mug. "Morning," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I sat at the table, pretending to check my phone while she rattled on about her day, meetings, errands, and more vague details about her retreat. I just nodded along. As soon as she left for work, I got to work. First, I called the hotel where she was planning to stay with him. I introduced myself as her assistant and said I needed to confirm the booking details. It was easier than I expected. The receptionist was busy and rattled off the check-in time, the room number, and the amenities without a second thought. They'd booked a luxury suite with a balcony. Quite the romantic gesture. Next, I called Noah. Noah was a private investigator I'd known since college. I hadn't told anyone about Grace yet, but Noah was the one person I could trust completely. He didn't ask a single unnecessary question. He just told me to meet him later that afternoon to go over my options. By the time Grace came home that evening, everything was in place. Noah had agreed to tail her, to get the photos and recordings I needed for a bulletproof case. "Oh, you're home early," she said as she walked through the door. "Yeah, wrapped up early today," I said, forcing a smile. "Thought I'd relax a bit." She nodded, dropping her bag on the sofa.
I'm starving.
"Let's order in." "Sure," I said, playing my part. We spent the evening like any other. Takeout, some Netflix, mindless small talk. She didn't suspect a thing. I had to use every ounce of willpower not to scream the truth at her right then, but I reminded myself that patience was my only ally. When she finally went to bed, I stayed up with the materials Noah had sent over. Had already dug up dirt on her lover. He was a senior executive at her firm, and to no one's surprise, he was married with 3 kids of his own. His name was Jake. The hypocrisy of it all was staggering. I stared at the photos of them, trying to process what they meant and the sheer depth of the lie she was living. When I finally received the last set of photos from Noah, I knew I was ready. I spent the rest of the evening packing up Grace's entire life. Her clothes, her shoes, her jewelry, everything she owned went into cardboard boxes. I lined them up neatly by the front door, topped with a folder of evidence and my letter. Then, I sat on the sofa and waited. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but it wasn't out of fear anymore. It was pure anticipation. Around midnight, I heard her car pull into the garage. A moment later, the door clicked open. There she was, hair a bit messy, face a little flushed from the night. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the boxes. Her eyes darted from the pile to me, then to the folder sitting on top. "Sam," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What's going on?" I stood up and walked over to her slowly. "You know exactly what's going on, Grace," I said. Her eyes went wide, and for the first time, I saw real fear on her face. Not guilt. Not regret. Just the look of someone who knew they'd finally run out of room to lie. "Sit down," I said, my voice cold and hard. "We need to talk." She didn't move at first, but when I crossed my arms and stared her down, she slunk over to the sofa. I grabbed the folder and tossed it onto the coffee table in front of her. "Open it," I commanded. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely flip the pages. With every picture, her face got paler, and the tears started to spill over. She started, but I threw up a hand to stop her. "Save it," I cut her off. My voice felt like a blade slicing through the silence. "You've already said enough." In that moment, after weeks of silence and carrying the weight of her lies, I felt the power shift. And I wasn't about to let it go. Grace sat there clutching the folder like it was a life raft, her eyes darting between me and the proof of her betrayal. She opened her mouth again, but no words came out. Every lie Shed spent months building had just turned to dust. I stood over her, waiting for the weight of her choices to sink in. No more excuses. No more games. "Start talking," I said finally, with a calm that seemed to make her flinch. "I don't even know where to begin," she stammered, the mascara running down her cheeks. "Start with the truth," I replied. "That's usually a good place to start. And don't waste my time with that, it just happened crap. I've already heard enough of that nonsense." She wiped her face with trembling hands. "I didn't want it to be like this, I swear. Things have been so hard between us, and I felt so incredibly lonely. Don't you dare." I snapped, my voice rising. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me. You had choices, Grace. You could have talked to me. You could have tried to fix what we had. You think we were struggling? Maybe we were, but instead of trying to solve it, you chose to climb into bed with another man. That was your choice." Her sobs got louder, but I felt absolutely nothing. Those tears didn't move me. They weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of a woman who'd been caught. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was stupid, Sam. It was a mistake." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "A mistake? Spilling coffee on the rug is a mistake. Forgetting our anniversary is a mistake. This was a calculated, months-long betrayal. You looked me in the eye and lied to me every single day while you were planning weekend getaways with him. This isn't a mistake, Grace. This is who you are." She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I needed her to feel every ounce of the pain Shed put me through. "I'll do anything to fix this," she begged, her voice cracking. "Therapy, marriage counseling. I'll quit my job tomorrow. I'll block him. I'll do whatever you want, Sam. Just please don't throw us away." I looked at her, my jaw tight, and my words came out like ice. "You think I am the one throwing us away? You already did that the second you let him into your life. You killed this marriage the moment you decided I wasn't good enough for you." Her crying became uncontrollable, and she buried her face in her hands. I stood there in silence, letting her mourn her own defeat while I processed what had to happen next. When she finally looked up, her face was red and swollen. "Please, Sam. Tell me what I have to do. I'll do anything." I leaned in to catch her gaze, making sure she saw the resolve in my eyes. "What do I want?" I said slowly, emphasizing every word. "I want you to take your boxes and get out of this house tonight. Our marriage is over." Her face contorted in agony, and she shook her head. "No, Sam, please. We can fix this. I'll make it right." "You can't make this right," I said coldly. "You've already done too much damage, and honestly, I don't even want to fix it. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if you're lying to me again or what else you're hiding. I deserve better than that." Her sobs grew louder, but I remained firm. This wasn't just about her betrayal, it was about taking back my dignity. "I already packed your things," I said, gesturing toward the door. You can take them and go wherever you want, but you aren't staying here. Grace stood up slowly, her legs looking like they might give out at any second. She looked at the boxes by the door. Sam, I have nowhere to go. You should have thought about that before you destroyed our life, I replied, my tone like iron. Maybe your boyfriend can find a place for you. Her face twisted with a mix of pain and anger, but she didn't argue. She knew she'd lost everything. I watched her drag her things out, her movements slow and defeated. When she finally turned to me one last time, clutching her last bag, she whispered, I know you hate me right now, but I really do love you, Sam. I always have. Don't say that, I snapped. Don't ruin the word love by throwing it around now. Love doesn't act like this. Love doesn't lie, it doesn't betray, and it definitely doesn't sneak off to hotel rooms. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face, and walked out into the night. As soon as the door clicked shut, a terrifying silence settled over the house. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she'd just been. A part of me wanted to break down, to let all the emotions out, but I wouldn't allow it. Instead, I grabbed that folder of evidence and walked over to the fireplace. I tossed it in and watched the flames consume the photos, the messages, and the hotel receipts. It wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the start of something new. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally take a breath. A few weeks later, the dust finally settled, but the ripples of the choices Grace made were just beginning to turn into a tidal wave. I realized that simply letting her go wasn't enough for the world to be right again. Justice isn't just about moving on, it's about making sure the truth has its day in court, and in the real world. I made two final moves. First, I sent a certified digital copy of Noah's entire file, the hotel logs, the photos of the retreat, and the undeniable evidence of the affair, to the chief legal officer at Grace's firm. In the world of high-stakes Boston corporate culture, a senior executive having a sexual relationship with a subordinate isn't just a gossip point, it's a massive HR liability and a violation of code of conduct policies. Second, I did the one thing that I knew would truly balance the scales. I sent an identical envelope to Jake's wife. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because she deserved to know who she was sleeping next to every night, just like I had. The consequences were swift and devastating. Within 48 hours, both Grace and Jake were summoned to the firm's headquarters downtown. They weren't there for a meeting, they were there to be terminated for cause. No severance packages, no glowing recommendations, and no golden parachutes. They were escorted out of the building by security, their professional reputations in the city of Boston essentially burned to the ground. But the professional ruin was only the beginning. Jake's wife didn't hesitate. She filed for a contested divorce, hiring the most aggressive lawyer in the state. Since they had a prenuptial agreement with an infidelity clause, Jake was left with almost nothing. The man who had been so confident in that bar was suddenly a disgraced former executive living in a cheap rental, buried under legal fees and child support. Grace found out the hard way that a man who will cheat with you will never be there for you. As soon as Jake lost his money and his status, he vanished. He wanted nothing to do with her. Grace went from living a life of luxury and planning leadership retreats, to working an entry-level temp job, struggling to pay the rent on a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the far edge of the city. Every time she looked in the mirror, she had to face the reality that she had traded a loving husband and a beautiful life for a man who didn't even know her middle name. As for me, I stood on the back deck of my house on a cool Friday evening. The Boston skyline was shimmering in the distance, a sea of lights representing a million different stories. For the first time, I didn't feel like a character in a tragedy. I felt like the author of my own life. I walked back inside, the hardwood floors gleaming under the warm light. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. It was a sanctuary. I had reclaimed my space, my peace, and most importantly, my self-respect. I picked up a book I'd wanted to read for years, sat down in my favorite chair, and smiled. The weight was gone. The lies were dead. I was Sam, and for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.